Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Kevin Jason, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Legal Defense Fund. For the past 85 years, LDF has been the premier legal institution fighting for racial justice, using the power of law to expand and defend civil rights in the United States. And since our inception, we've worked to ensure Black communities across the country enjoy the full representation and benefits of citizenship in this country. Today, we filed a lawsuit that is very much about the citizenship of Black and Latino New Yorkers and how the NYPD denies this citizenship through the use of labels born out of discriminatory principles. For over a decade, the NYPD has maintained a so-called criminal groups database, also known as the gang database, that's a secret digital file through which officers indiscriminately label tens of thousands of Black and Latino New Yorkers as members of associates, of street gangs or crews, and subject them to increased surveillance and downstream consequences as a result. However, the criteria used for labeling people as such do not rely on criminality. Rather, they're extraordinarily broad, and the guidance for inclusion are infused with racial stereotypes. Young men have been added for appearing in photos with family within their own housing complex. They've been added for writing happy birthday to someone. In total, the result is that this NYPD database, which is purportedly designed to track criminal groups in New York, is 99% Black and Latino. For these downstream harms, we've heard from people that they've lost their jobs, that they self-censor their speech, and that they do not feel free to express themselves musically. Also, due to this labeling, young men, these Black and Latino men, have felt a suffocating presence in the city, and particularly within their own neighborhoods and community. Those labeled as a member of a criminal group experience harassment and interrogations by police. These interrogations begin with something as simple as littering or jaywalking. From there, officers who have access to information on the database and whether or not someone is labeled as a member of a criminal group, they then may use the opportunity to ask additional questions, detain these individuals, and essentially interrogate them. Now, the NYPD talks about that this is a law enforcement tool, but there is no evidence that the database and these tools actually improve public safety or New Yorkers. And tellingly, this focus on so-called gang policing is not following any response to any observable crime or increase in crime rates in the city, nor has it succeeded in preventing crime in neighborhoods that are targeted for increased surveillance. We're happy today to finally shine a light on this and to file this lawsuit. And we're grateful to be in partnership with Latino Justice, the Legal Aid Society, the Bronx Defenders, the law firm Ballard Spahr. And from here, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Alexis Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexis Johnson. I'm Assistant Counsel at the Legal Defense Fund. With this lawsuit, we're asking a federal court to strike down the NYPD's racially discriminatory gangs database and stop violating the constitutional rights of Black and Latino people that it is targeted and labeled. Doing that would be impossible without the bravery and selflessness of our three clients who stepped forward to stand up not only for themselves, but also for their families, their friends, and their communities. The NYPD has labeled our clients as gang members based on nothing more than stereotypes and unwarranted assumptions. Because of that label, our clients and other Black and Latino boys and young men can't do or enjoy the same things their white peers do without running the risk of being stopped, surveilled, and repeatedly harassed by the NYPD. Our clients and all of the Black and Latino people on the database deserve to feel free and at ease in their own homes and in the playgrounds in their neighborhoods. Black and Latino people deserve the freedom to express ourselves on social media without fear that we'll be labeled as gang members because we used the wrong emoji. We deserve to run errands or take a trip to the grocery store without being harassed or stopped and interrogated about neighbors who we may or may not even know. Unfortunately, our clients aren't free to do any of those things, to enjoy those fundamental aspects of daily life while the database and the NYPD's gang policing practices continue.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Regata Sapling. I'm a staff attorney in the Special Litigation Unit at the Legal Aid Society. 99% of the people on the NYPD criminal group database are Black and Latino. That is not precision policing. That is a racially discriminatory policy in action. A policing program that exclusively targets Black and Latino New Yorkers is unjust. That is not precision policing. Let's call it what it is. The database is another version of stop and frisk. The NYPD has continued stop and frisk under a new name. Now the NYPD uses gang as a narrative to justify their aggressive stops, arrests, and surveillance. The NYPD developed the database after courts and legislature declared stop and frisk practices were unconstitutional. And the reasons stop and frisks were declared unconstitutional are the same reasons that the database is unconstitutional. More than 85% of the people NYPD stopped under the stop and frisk practice were Black and Latino. And more than 90% of the people stopped by the NYPD, they found no evidence that they engaged in any criminal activity. The database is using the same racist policies, the same racist tactics, and getting an even more discriminatory result, 99%. And like the unconstitutional stop and frisk policies, no criminal conduct whatsoever is required to be added to the gang database. In fact, NYPD often uses arbitrary information to add people. Gang affiliation is defined so broadly that the NYPD can digitally stop and frisk anybody by adding them to the gang database. The database is digitized stop and frisk. It's accessible to any NYPD officer who has a DAS, domain awareness system. And it gives police cover to escalate encounters with Black and brown New Yorkers that appear on the database, regardless of why they were added. The NYPD uses the database as a justification to send officers to over-police under-resourced areas all over the city, perpetuating a cycle of relentless policing and criminalization of our communities. These are the very same tactics that were already addressed in the stop and frisk and when stop and frisk was outlawed. In 2013, the federal court found that NYPD had engaged in widespread, unconstitutional racial profiling and intentionally targeted Black and brown New Yorkers. And the court ordered sweeping reforms, including an independent monitor of the NYPD. So then the NYPD immediately pivoted and started using their new centralized criminal group database in conjunction with expanding gang policing to target the same demographics they were banned from stopping and frisking. Following the federal court's order that the NYPD ceased its unconstitutional and racially biased stop and frisk, the stops recorded annually from 2014 to 2018 decreased by 97% once stop and frisk was outlawed. But during that same exact period, from January 2014 to February 2018, the number of people entered into the NYPD criminal group database as crew or gang members increased by 70%. So you can see the direct correlation there. The gang database is very clearly NYPD's method of working around the law and using stop and frisk practices. The NYPD remains under federal court supervision based on its widespread constitutional violations through stop and frisk. And after more than a decade of supervision, the NYPD has still failed to substantially comply with the court's ruling, including remedying its practices of intentional discrimination. The gang database is not the first racially discriminatory practice or policing tactic of the NYPD. It's part of a broader history a history of unconstitutional policing targeting Black and brown New Yorkers. The legacy of stop and frisk lives on in the gang database. The profiling and surveilling of Black and Latino communities has to stop. It must end. And we are calling on the courts to uphold the laws that protect us from unconstitutional, blatant discrimination by the NYPD in this use of the gang database. Thank you. Sure, that's RIGODIS, last name APPLING. Regattas.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Ann Benheisen. I am the supervising attorney in the impact litigation practice at the Bronx Defenders. We're suing the city of New York because the NYPD is running a racially discriminatory surveillance program, the gang database. This database does not make us safer. Instead, it functions to give the NYPD free license to label, harass, and criminalize Black and Latino New Yorkers, especially young people, without cause, evidence, or oversight. And it's happening in secret. The NYPD adds people, including children and teenagers, without ever notifying them, without giving them any way to challenge this label, and without ever charging them with a crime. We filed this lawsuit to put an end to this unconstitutional database because being a teenager in the Bronx shouldn't be a crime, because living in public housing shouldn't make you a target, because the Constitution doesn't have exceptions for race or zip code. As my colleague Regattas said, this database is Stop and Frisk 2.0. The NYPD claims that they are using precision policing, when in fact, this is racial profiling. 99% of the people on this database are Black or Latino. That's not by accident. That's by design. And just like the NYPD's racist stop and frisk policies were unconstitutional, this racist database is also unconstitutional. This database impacts Black and Latino young people all over the city, the Bronx included. As the rest of the US learns about how dangerous it is to label someone a gang member with no proof, Black and Latino New Yorkers have known this type of unfair labeling for years. The Bronx Defenders has had teenage clients stopped by police 5 or 6 times a month for no reason, except that the NYPD targets their home, the entire public housing complex, as a gang location. A young woman was denied a job because the NYPD flagged her social media, just for wishing happy birthday to a cousin whom the NYPD claimed was an affiliate of a gang. People have lost jobs, been denied housing, been arrested repeatedly without being convicted, all based on a digital label they never knew they had and they can't get rid of. This database does not improve public safety. The NYPD has no evidence that it will prevent violence. Instead, this database makes vulnerable populations, Black and Latino youth, more fearful of the police. The fear this creates drives people away from calling the police when they really need help. And there's no way to get off the list, no independent review, no accountability. This lawsuit is about restoring basic rights. The right to be free from stereotype-driven harassment, surveillance, and discrimination just for where you live or what you look like. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mariana Lopez, and I am an attorney with Latino Justice for LDF. February 2025, the NYPD's so-called gang database tracks over 13,000 people. 99% of them are Black or Latino. This is racial profiling, plain and simple. This is over-policing and surveillance. The NYPD maintains no consistent definition of what constitutes a criminal group and relies on vague and broad criteria to facilitate racial profiling. Our youth are being labeled as threats because of where they live, what they wear, who they stand next to, or for attending events like the Puerto Rican Day Parade. The NYPD is criminalizing culture and identity. This database fuels wrongful arrests and detentions, tears families apart, and strips people of their futures, all without due process. Latino Justice is here today to say enough. This lawsuit is about justice, transparency, and the right to exist without being watched, followed, or feared. We demand the immediate dismantling of the racist database. And given what we know about increased deportations nationwide, we PD immediately confirmed that it is not sharing information on the database with ICE. Our communities deserve dignity, not discrimination, safety, not surveillance, and justice, not profiling. Thank you. To protect their privacy and ensure their identities remain confidential, our clients are not participating in this conference this morning. However, one of our clients has prepared a statement regarding this morning's filing that I will read on his behalf now. For nearly half my life, I've lived in fear of even the smallest interaction with the NYPD. Minor things like jaywalking, littering, traffic stops have led to hours-long interrogations about crimes I had nothing to do with, just because of where I'm from. One of the most devastating moments was when I was picked up by NYPD while walking with friends in my neighborhood. The only friend left behind that night was murdered, and the officer shared that news with me 5 hours into questioning, almost gleefully. Being placed on this database has stripped everything from me. I can't even visit my family in the community I was raised in without fearing harassment. It's taken a toll on my mental, emotional, and physical health. I've stayed silent out of fear of retaliation, but the harassment can't get any worse than what I'm already experiencing, and that's why I'm speaking out. Since being added to this list at 21, I've grown into a father, one who refuses to let this decade-long nightmare continue. I hope this lawsuit leads to the abolition of the NYPD's gang database, so that I and so many other Black and brown men can live freely without being hunted by those who are supposed to protect us. They've tried to use me as a pawn against my own community, but I won't let them.
Good morning. My name is Victor Dempsey. I'm a senior community organizer with Legal Defense Fund and also an organizer with the Gangs Coalition. I stand here today not just as a representative for these organizations I mentioned, but as a lifelong New Yorker, as a son, a brother, someone who spent the better part of the last 10 years fighting to expose and dismantle the deeply harmful, unconstitutional practices that have plagued our communities, particularly the NYPD's so-called gang database. For nearly a decade, I've sat with families devastated by the quiet violence of over-policing. I've watched as young Black men and women, some as young as 13, were swept into a system with no transparency, no accountability, and no pathway out. Not because they committed a crime, but because of who they were friends with, what neighborhood they live in, and what they posted on social media, and the type of music they listen to express themselves. Let me be clear, this database is not a tool for safety. This is not a preventative measure. It is not a measure that's gonna address violence. It's a digital dragnet that criminalizes Black youth, stifles opportunity, and further erodes the trust between community and those who want to protect them. I've seen far and far too many times doing the work in the communities where folks don't know who to trust at times. But when we sit down and have conversations, it always comes back to them trusting their neighbors, them trusting the folks who live next to them. We've seen how this system strips away dignity, presumes guilt over innocence, and devastates futures, often without anyone knowing that they were added to the list in the first place. There is no due process, no process of appealing, and no evidence to be required to land you on it. What this database really represents is a high-tech extension of a decade-long legacy of surveillance, profiling, and systematic harm patterns of over-policing that our communities know all too well. That's why today's legal actions matter. The work that all these litigators have done to bring this claim forth has been a direct representation of the communities that we service over nearly a decade, and hearing their voices and making sure that their experiences and harms are at the forefront of the claim that's being brought today. It's about affirming that our communities deserve justice, transparency, and the right to exist without being treated as suspects. We need real solutions, community-led solutions. We talk a lot about what the NYPD can and cannot do. What they cannot do is criminalize Black and brown youth just because they feel like they can. This will address the root causes of harm, poverty, lack of access to housing, education, and employment. Public safety doesn't come from surveillance. It comes from investment, from care, and from trust. Our youth need opportunities, not databases. They need mentors, not mugshots. They need a city that sees them as future leaders, not as threats to be monitored. This complaint is a step forward, but the larger fight for dignity, for justice, and community-driven safety continues. And we won't stop until every Black New Yorker can live free from criminalization, free from fear, and free from the power that we've always had hanging over us, called by NYPD, by the use of their gang database. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Brawers, community organizer for Legal Aid Society Community Justice Unit. I'm here to speak on the gang database, which doesn't make communities safer. We all know resources and investments make communities safer. I'm a product of that. I was locked up before. I've been around a lot of negative things, but not criminal activity, just being a kid, having fun, throwing rocks at the bus, playing in the steps and playing nigga knocking on people's doors and running away. No criminal activity, just being a kid. So I'm a product of that. I come from that. But now I stand with my colleagues and I'm out and I'm teaching youth how to change, not to be a gang member, not to do gang criminal activity. It's not illegal to be in a gang. In LA, everywhere there's gang members, it's not illegal to be a gang. It's illegal to do gang criminal activity. So the police is using the gang database and criminalizing our youth when they're not doing criminal activity. They're just being kids. And then the problem with that is I go outside and I'm a father of many. I got 5 children. I watch my sons, my daughters play. And when my oldest son is going to the store for his siblings and I'm watching NYPD follow him from corner to corner while he going to get ices, come to his mother, come to his dad to receive money, and I see the police harassing him, I ask him, why are you surveilling my son like that? When I'm watching you surveil my son and he's not doing no criminal activity. And they say, we had a shooting 2 weeks ago. We're not here, and my son didn't do the shooting, so why is my son being criminalized? And why didn't you inform me if my son is on the gang database and he's a youth? I think parents should be informed, which they're not doing. So we see that NYPD doesn't work with communities. So I think we should invest in our communities and our people that work with everyone. And that's what I do. So that's what I want to speak on today. I also know about the gang database because I'm from a NYCHA housing, Manhattanville houses and Grant houses. That was the first biggest raid in New York City, the gang raid, which was 103 youth. They locked up 103 youth, but it was the biggest gang raid and they treated us like we were the mafia or the mob, and they had helicopters and all these other things. And now that same youth are my friends. They've been my friends then and now we adults. And they were a part of the gang database. And I asked them, what did the gang database do to help us now? Y'all locked us up now. What is the solution after? Y'all know, y'all put them on the gang database. Y'all know who they are. Y'all surveil them every day. What do you do to help now? They need housing, they need jobs, and the only people that really help them are community members. And I know that because I'm a part of TCMF, Living Redemption, both sides of the gun, and I give back. It's not about my pockets, it's about my heart. Some people just do it for the pockets. We don't do that. And that's what public safety need to learn. They need to work with community members. And I know that. So the gang database must be abolished, must get dismantled. And I feel sorry for the thousands of people that's placed on that database without knowing. And I know they didn't do no criminal activity because a part of my family and my friends are on the gang database. And I know this, and I know they don't do criminal activity. So they must get rid of that gang database. Thank you.